When I married Clara, I thought I had hit the jackpot. She was everything I'd ever dreamed of in a partner. Bright, charming, and undeniably beautiful. Our wedding day felt like the beginning of a fairy tale, and for years, we lived a life that could have been lifted straight out of one. I was making waves as an architect, designing spaces that people admired and envied, while Clara became the linchpin of our social circle, the kind of woman who made everyone feel at ease. Together, we built a happy life. Dinner parties at our house were always the highlight of the month. Friends marveled at the way we complimented each other. Me, the quiet dreamer. Clara, the vibrant spark. For a long time, I believed them. Only recently did I start to notice something not right. They were small things at first, almost invisible if you weren't looking for them. Clara began spending more and more time at the gym. She'd always talked about wanting to focus on her fitness, so I thought nothing of it when she finally committed to a routine. She was glowing with newfound energy, and her mood seemed lighter. I was proud of her for sticking to it, encouraged her whenever I could. She'd often tell me about her personal trainer, Aaron, a professional and encouraging guy who apparently knew how to keep her motivated. I never felt threatened by it. Why would I? Clara was my wife, my partner, my best friend. I trusted her completely. But then, her stories about Aaron started to slip into every conversation. Aaron says I should try this new workout, or Aaron recommended this protein shake. It was almost funny how much she talked about him. Then there were the late nights. Clara would come home later than usual, apologizing with an easy smile and an excuse that sounded reasonable enough. She would casually mention running into some gym friends or explain that they had grabbed coffee after the session, as if it was nothing out of the ordinary. It wasn't that I didn't believe her. I had no reason not to, but a tiny voice in the back of my mind whispered questions I wasn't ready to ask. Weekends were worse. Clara, who used to love lounging around and watching old movies with me, now insisted on going to the gym even on days we planned to spend together. She would assure me that she'd be back in a couple of hours, but when she finally returned, there was always a distracted, almost restless air about her. At first, I chalked it up to her new lifestyle. People change. I knew that. But something about Clara's change felt different. It wasn't just the gym or the way she looked. It was the way she avoided my gaze when I asked too many questions. I tried to brush it off. We all go through phases, don't we? Maybe this was hers. But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't ignore the growing weight in my chest, the feeling that something important was slipping through my fingers. A few weeks later, the first real crack appeared in our carefully constructed life. My firm was hosting a charity gala, a glamorous event where architects and developers mingled to toast their successes while quietly competing for the next big project. I asked Clara to come along, hoping we could steal some time together away from her busy gym schedule. She seemed reluctant at first, claiming she wasn't sure if she had anything suitable to wear. But I pressed her, telling her how much I wanted her there with me. Finally, she relented. When the evening came, Clara looked stunning, as she always did. Her little black dress hugged her in all the right places, and her smile lit up the room. For a moment, I felt like things were back to normal, as if the distance I'd been sensing was all in my head. But halfway through the night, Clara excused herself, saying she needed some air. I didn't think much of it at first. The ballroom was packed, and the air felt heavy with the chatter of too many people crammed into one space. I continued chatting with colleagues, sipping on my whiskey, expecting Clara to return in a few minutes. 20 minutes passed, then 30. When she finally came back, her cheeks were flushed, and her hair looked slightly tousled, like she'd been caught in a strong wind. I asked if everything was okay, doing my best to keep my tone light and casual. She would assure me everything was fine, her voice coming off a little too casual. She'd tell me that she'd run into an old friend outside, and they had gotten caught up in conversation, losing track of time. She'd apologize, though it didn't feel quite right. An old friend? It wasn't like Clara to keep secrets, but something about the way she said it, quick, almost rehearsed, made my chest tighten. Still, I let it go. I didn't want to be the insecure husband who couldn't trust his wife. The following week, I decided to surprise her. She'd mentioned she had a late gym session and planned to stay for a while afterward to chat with friends. It sounded innocent enough, but something was bothering me. I wrapped up work early that evening and drove to her gym. As I parked across the street, I felt ridiculous. This wasn't me. I wasn't the kind of man who spied on his wife. And yet there I was, gripping the steering wheel with my hands, telling myself that I just wanted to see her smile when she walked out the door. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Groups of people filtered out, laughing and chatting as they headed to their cars. Then, I saw her. Clara walked out, her gym bag slung over one shoulder, her cheeks flushed from the workout, or at least I thought it was from the workout. She wasn't alone. Aaron was with her, his tall, muscular frame towering over her as they strolled to the parking lot. They were laughing, the kind of laughter that makes your whole body move, their heads leaning in just a little too close. Then he touched her arm. It was subtle, barely more than a brush of his hand, but the way she smiled at him made my stomach churn. It wasn't the kind of smile you give a trainer. It was warm, like they were sharing a secret no one else was in on. I wanted to get out of the car and confront them, but I couldn't move. I told myself I was imagining things, reading too much into a simple moment. Clara had always been friendly, and Aaron was just her trainer. That night, I didn't say anything. When she came home, she was her usual bubbly self, chatting about her workout and how Aaron was helping her perfect her form. I nodded along, forcing a smile, all the while feeling like a stranger in my own home. The doubts kept swirling, no matter how hard I tried to push them away. Something was wrong. I just didn't know what. The unease began to gnaw at me, settling in my chest like a stone that refused to budge. Clara's laughter seemed louder these days, but it wasn't directed toward me. Her phone was never far from her hand, and though I told myself it was harmless, I couldn't help noticing the way she tilted the screen away when I passed. I wanted to trust her. I needed to trust her. But doubt is a stubborn thing. It grows roots, spreading quietly until it takes hold of everything you thought you knew. A few days after the incident at the gym, Clara mentioned a mixer being held by the gym staff and members. It was casual, she said, just a way to build community and thank everyone for their dedication. She seemed genuinely excited about it, urging me to come along. She mentioned casually that everyone would be bringing their spouses, almost too casually. Then she added that I'd finally get to meet Aaron, a guy who had been eager to meet me after hearing so much about me from her. There was something in the way she said it that didn't sit well, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I hesitated. The idea of spending an evening with fitness buffs and their overenthusiastic trainers wasn't exactly my scene, but the thought of seeing Aaron, the man I couldn't stop picturing next to Clara, left me feeling uneasy. Still, I didn't want to seem suspicious. I forced a smile and agreed. The event was held at a local brewery, its rustic charm dimly lit with string lights and packed with gym-goers. Clara wore a fitted blouse and jeans, a simple outfit that somehow made her look effortlessly radiant. I, on the other hand, felt like an outsider among people who seemed carved out of marble, their conversations peppered with talk of protein shakes and personal bests. Aaron greeted us at the door, a wide smile stretched across his annoyingly perfect face. He was even more imposing up close, broad shoulders, easy confidence, and the kind of charisma that made you want to dislike him on principle. He introduced himself with a strong handshake, smiling confidently. He mentioned that Clara had told him a lot about me and quickly followed up with a compliment about how much she was thriving at the gym. His words were upbeat, but I could feel an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. I managed a polite nod, his words settling in my stomach like lead. As the evening wore on, I couldn't help noticing the way he and Clara interacted. It wasn't overt, no lingering touches or whispers, but it was there. A familiarity, a shared rhythm that felt just a little too comfortable. At one point, Clara left to grab drinks from the bar, leaving her gym bag behind. I didn't mean to snoop. I really didn't. But as I shifted the bag out of the way, a small, glossy object slipped out and landed on the floor. I bent down to pick it up, expecting a water bottle or maybe her phone charger. Instead, I found a keycard. It wasn't just any keycard. It was embossed with the logo of a boutique hotel downtown. My first thought was that it must have been misplaced or left over from a past work trip. But when Clara returned and saw the card in my hand, the color drained from her face. She asked, her voice trembling and sharp where I had found it. I told her it had fallen out of her bag, watching her every move as I spoke. She snatched it from my hand, stuffing it back into her bag with a quick motion, insisting that it was nothing, just something Aaron had asked her to hold on to for him. The way she said it didn't sit right, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I stared at her, trying to decipher the mix of guilt and panic in her eyes. Before I could say anything more, Aaron appeared, holding 2 beers and flashing his perfect, oblivious smile. He asked if everything was okay, his tone curious. Clara's laugh followed, but it sounded too forced, too bright to be convincing. She quickly responded, saying it was nothing, just clumsy her dropping things again. The way she said it didn't reassure me at all. The ride home was silent. Clara kept glancing at her phone, her fingers tapping nervously on her knee. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I needed time to think, to figure out what was real and what was just my paranoia. That night, as Clara slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My gut told me the keycard wasn't innocent, and I knew I couldn't keep ignoring the signs. The next morning, the house was quiet. Clara had left early, saying she had an extra-long session at the gym. Her words hung in the air long after she was gone, and I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had taken root the night before. The keycard haunted me. I kept replaying the moment in my head. Her pale face, the way she snatched it back, the flimsy excuse about Aaron. Every instinct told me there was more to it, but part of me didn't want to know the truth. Still, I needed answers. I couldn't live in this limbo, questioning every look, every word. I decided to wait until she came home and confront her. The hours dragged by. I worked on a project for one of my clients, but my mind wasn't in it. I kept glancing at the clock, the silence of the house amplifying my doubts. When Clara finally walked through the door that evening, I was sitting in the living room, the keycard on the coffee table in front of me. She froze when she saw it, her gym bag slipping off her shoulder. I told her we needed to talk, trying to keep my voice steady, though my heart was pounding in my chest. Clara hesitated for a moment before setting her bag down, almost like she was stalling. Then she asked, in a tone that felt too casual, too rehearsed, what it was about. I gestured toward the keycard, unable to hold back the suspicion anymore. I told her it was about that, and whatever it was she wasn't telling me. Her eyes flicked to the card, then back to me. For a moment, she said nothing, her mouth opening and closing as though she were searching for the right words. She said it wasn't what I thought, that it was just something Aaron had given her to hold on to. She claimed she'd already told me that. But the way she said it didn't sound convincing, and I could feel the weight of the doubt growing heavier between us. I couldn't keep it in anymore. I asked her, my frustration taking over, why she expected me to believe her. I pointed out how strange it was that her trainer would need her to hold onto a hotel keycard. And then I brought up how her face had gone pale when I found it. She couldn't hide her reaction, no matter how hard she tried. It was clear something wasn't adding up. Clara crossed her arms, a clear signal that she wasn't about to give in. Her tone was defensive, trying to downplay everything. She told me I was blowing things out of proportion and insisted it was nothing. She couldn't understand why I was making such a big deal out of it. But her words didn't convince me. I couldn't contain it anymore. My frustration spilled over as I looked at Clara, my voice rising without me meaning to. I told her how everything had been bothering me, how she'd been acting differently for weeks, always coming home late, glued to her phone, and brushing me off when I tried to get close. And now this keycard, this piece of evidence, felt like the last straw. I told her I wasn't stupid, that I could see what was happening. Her face hardened, and I could see a flicker of anger in her eyes. She crossed her arms and challenged me, asking if I was saying that I didn't trust her. I told her firmly that I wasn't asking for anything but the truth, because at that moment, it felt like I was living with a stranger. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was deafening, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. Finally, I told her to get out, my voice cold and distant, a tone I didn't even recognize. Clara's eyes widened in shock as she started to speak, but I cut her off. I told her to just go, my hands trembling as I pointed toward the door. I couldn't even bring myself to look at her in that moment. Without another word, Clara grabbed her bag and walked out, the sound of the door closing behind her echoing in my ears. I sat there in the empty house, staring at the keycard on the table. The woman I thought I knew, the life I thought we had. It was all a lie, and I had no idea what to do next. After Clara left, the silence in the house was deafening. It felt like the walls were closing in, suffocating me with the weight of everything I just learned. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at nothing, replaying the confrontation over and over in my head. She was right about one thing. I'd been distant. Work had taken up so much of my time and energy, and I hadn't noticed how far apart we drifted. But that didn't excuse what she'd done. She could have talked to me. She could have told me she was unhappy instead of sneaking around behind my back. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream, punch something, let the rage consume me. But all I felt was numb. Betrayal is a strange thing. It doesn't hit all at once. It creeps up on you, chipping away at your sense of reality until you don't know what's real anymore. By the time I finally got up from the couch, the sun had set. I wandered through the house, each room feeling colder and emptier than the last. Her coffee cup was still in the sink, her shoes by the door, little reminders of the life we'd built together. A life that now felt like it had been a sham. I ended up in our bedroom, staring at the bed we'd shared for years. My mind flashed back to happier times. Lazy Sunday mornings, whispered conversations in the dark, laughter that used to come so easily. And now, all of it was tainted. I couldn't stay there. Grabbing my keys, I left the house without a clear destination in mind. I just needed to get out, to breathe, to think. I drove aimlessly for a while, the streets blurring together as my thoughts raced. At one point, I pulled into an empty parking lot and sat there, staring at the steering wheel, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. Eventually, I called my best friend, Lucas. He and I had been close since college, and he was the one person I knew I could trust. When he answered, his voice was cheerful, but it quickly turned serious when he heard mine. He asked what was wrong, his voice full of concern. I asked if we could meet up, my voice cracking even though I tried to keep it steady. I needed someone to talk to. He immediately agreed, asking where I was without a second thought. Over coffee, I told him everything. The late nights, the keycard, the confrontation. Saying it out loud made it feel more real, and by the time I finished, my hands were trembling. Lucas shook his head, his voice filled with sympathy. He told me he was sorry, expressing how hard it was for him to even imagine what I was going through at that moment. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After a pause, Lucas asked what I was planning to do next. The question hung in the air. What was I going to do? Part of me wanted to throw her out of my life entirely, to erase every trace of her and start over. But another part of me, a smaller, quieter part, wondered if there was still something worth salvaging. I admitted that I didn't know what to do. I felt like everything had been turned upside down. Without her, I no longer knew who I was. He told me I didn't need to have all the answers right away. He reminded me to take it one step at a time, and that no matter what I decided, he'd have my back. His words were a small comfort, but they didn't ease the ache in my chest. When I finally drove home, the house felt even emptier than before. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion. Morning came, and with it, the cold reality of my new normal. Clara hadn't called or texted, and I didn't reach out to her either. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Something had to change. I needed clarity, but I didn't know where to begin. Part of me wanted to throw myself into work, bury the pain under a mountain of tasks and deadlines. But another part of me knew that this wasn't something I could run from. I had to face it, no matter how much it hurt. I spent the day going through the motions, answering emails, taking calls, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Clara's face, heard her voice trembling as she tried to explain herself. By the afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I decided to call Clara. When she answered, her voice was soft, almost hesitant. She said she didn't think she would hear from me so soon. I said, in a firmer voice than I expected, that I needed to understand. I asked why it had come to this. Why had everything become so tangled? Why had Clara made such a choice? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her words were measured, careful. She told me she didn't have a simple answer. It wasn't just one thing, she said. It was a lot of little things that built up over time. She felt invisible, like she didn't matter anymore. And when Aaron started noticing her, she admitted, it felt good. It felt like she was alive again. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to argue, to tell her that she'd always mattered, that I'd never stopped caring. But deep down, I knew there was some truth to what she was saying. I had been distant. I had taken her for granted. I told her that it didn't justify what she did, my voice cracking as I spoke. I told her she should have told me, that she should have given me a chance to fix things. She whispered that she knew, and that she was so sorry. She didn't expect me to forgive her, and honestly, she didn't even know if she could forgive herself. But she admitted that she didn't know how to break the cycle we were stuck in. And now, she said, she had destroyed everything. Her honesty was like a double-edged sword. It gave me the clarity I'd been seeking, but it also made the pain sharper, more real. We talked for a while longer, rehashing the same points, circling the same questions. By the time we hung up, I felt drained, like I'd run a marathon without moving an inch. That evening, I went for a long walk, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. As I wandered through the neighborhood, I thought about everything Clara had said, her feelings of neglect, her yearning to feel seen. It all made sense in a twisted, heartbreaking way, but it didn't make it right. The truth was, I still loved Clara. Despite everything, a part of me wanted to believe we could find our way back to each other. But I wasn't sure if that was enough. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. As I lay in bed that night, I realized that this wasn't just about Clara's choices or her betrayal. It was also about me, about the kind of person I wanted to be, the life I wanted to live. It was a week later when Clara asked to meet in person. Her voice on the phone was steady, but there was a weight to her words, like she'd already decided something and just needed to say it out loud. We met at the park, the same one where we used to take evening walks years ago, back when things felt simple, back when we still laughed without effort. Clara arrived first, sitting on a bench near the old oak tree. When I walked up, she looked up at me with a faint, sad smile. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I sat down beside her, leaving a respectful space between us. She started by saying that she'd been doing a lot of thinking, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She told me it was about us, about everything that had happened. I nodded, bracing myself for what I felt was coming. I could hear the weight of her words as she began, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She started by apologizing again, her voice soft but unwavering. She said she was sorry, not just for what she'd done, but for not being honest with me sooner. She admitted she'd been lying to herself for a long time, trying to make things work, trying to feel something that just wasn't there anymore. Her words hit like a cold wind, numbing and sharp. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I said that she was telling me she didn't love me anymore. She turned to look at me, her eyes filling with tears. She told me, her voice trembling, that she was sorry, but yes, she didn't love me anymore. She said she cared about me, and always would, but the love we once had was gone, and she didn't think it was something we could get back. I sat there in silence, staring at the ground. Somewhere deep inside, I'd already known. I'd seen it in the way she stopped looking at me the way she used to, felt it in the growing distance between us. But hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. We sat there for a while, the silence stretching between us, heavy with the weight of finality. Eventually, I spoke, my words slow and deliberate. I told her that I guessed this was it, that we would file the papers and move on. She nodded, her face a mixture of relief and sorrow, and agreed, saying she thought it was for the best, for both of us.